Something about the jobs data just isn't adding up. There's a lot of positive signs, but the economy is showing massive amounts of weakness. So, why should we take a closer look at the jobs data? Well, there is something that is much, much deeper than what is on the surface and what everybody is talking about. Because if you look at the jobs data here and you see exactly what I'm talking about, we saw a massive amount of drop off here for non-farm payrolls starting in 2025. And you saw an increase, but then you saw a slight decrease showing some more weakness. March was showing the signs of potentially being on the up and up, but April is showing a slight decline. Whereas all the headlines are saying that, hey, the jobs are very steady in April, despite the tariffs. Now, I think it is not just the tariffs that these employers are worrying about. I think there's massive amounts of economic uncertainty, that it's not necessarily just all about the tariffs. But it's interesting that they always point that out, and every single headline just says tariffs, tariffs, tariffs. Now, while the report from the US Labor Department shows positive signs, other economic indicators suggest a looming downturn. Now, let's get into this article a little bit more because I think that there is some great points made here. The healthcare industry had a very high total gain, but that sum is consistent with the average monthly growth. So the healthcare continued to grow up, and people wanted to front load and bring in more material before the tariff hike, right? So it seems like that is everything that everybody is saying here, is that the GDP is down, jobs are solid, but consumer confidence is at a 5-year low in April. And the US economy is shrinking in the first quarter of this year. So they're showing that, hey, there is some negative signs here from different data, but we just aren't seeing it in the jobs data. So why aren't we seeing it there? I think we aren't seeing it in the jobs data because people are just realizing that the jobs are there, but hiring is not. Okay. I think that's the big aspect of all of this, that consumer confidence is down, the US economy, the labor market remains steady. So these employers laid off a bunch of people during the COVID crash. A lot of skilled workers sent them all into retirement. And now we're feeling the after effects of all of this. The skilled workers aren't necessarily there anymore. They aren't there to, essentially lead this new young generation back up and tell them exactly what they need to do, how to be successful at these positions. So I think that that is the unique aspect of what we are seeing. But there's a trifecta of economic update this week that it shows that uncertainty is here to stay. One of those things is whether or not we'll cut interest rates. And we're going to get into that here later. As you guys know, I love to track that. But first, we're going to keep on to the jobs market and show that, because we saw the GDP report slowed the economy. Everybody has been freaking out about the GDP. But remember, as I stated in that last live stream there, is that GDP, part of the initial calculation of GDP is government spending. Well, Doge has been around just to strictly eliminate government spending. So, of course, we're going to see a negative effect in GDP, but a lot of it has also been from the imports and exports aspects that have been affected by the tariffs. Let's not get that wrong. That is still an issue as to why GDP lowered. But what we're also seeing, major brands, flag consumer anxiety, right? So even though we've seen jobs at a steady growth, the American employer is adding better than expected, but the unemployment rate has stayed low and unchanged at 4.2%. It's too early to tell how the Trump's trade war will affect quarters ahead, but here's the good, the bad from this week's economic data. The jobs report is good, right? The unemployment has stayed around good, but hiring doesn't seem to be really picking back up anytime soon. So before this data that reflects hiring decisions that were made in February and March, so-called Liberation Day on April 2nd. So the labor market data is collected around the 12th of each month. So another issue with all of the things that we see here and all the things that the US government reports is it's all backward looking data. So we get this data a month too late. And then we got to revise everything and make decisions on this data based on data. That's a month too late. So you could see where we could run into a lot of issues here when we utilize this data to make major decisions. But hey, you know what? We have to take it at face value. April's employment data displayed remarkable stability, leaving aside the question of sustainability of that feature. So, but what else is going down, right? I did a video on this earlier last week that consumer confidence has fallen to a COVID era low. And we've seen that, right? There wasn't much to celebrate, but the consumer is feeling some anxiety towards all of this. The economy shrank, but it's not all doom and gloom. So the experts, or so-called experts, assumed that the economy was going to shrink a lot more than it ended up doing. So, all right, that's the positive sign of the takeaway here. But either way, April jobs have shown resilience in wake of the liberation day of the tariff announcement on April 2nd. So we'll see, right? I mean, take all these things with a grain of salt. But the reality of the situation is that every single move that is made by either Trump, whether it's relative to tariffs or Jerome Powell cutting interest rates, something along those lines, everything that you see, all of these data points, they're backward looking. And because they're backward looking, they're not completely up to date. So it takes a little bit for us to see in the data the effects of the moves that are being made. Now, this is all to say that the reality of the situation is that these things are going to take time to go into full effect. Whether they're positive or negative effects that we're going to see in the economy, we have yet to see them. And we will be yet to see them for quite some time, right? These cuts that we could potentially see, look, I mean, we'll get into it right now. The cuts that we'll see in less than 2 days won't happen, right? 2.4%. I'd be shocked if this thing flips on its head at this point in time. But it seems like everybody's anticipating 0 cuts here in the next 2 days. So what does that mean, right? What does this mean when we see 0 cuts? It means that Powell still believes that inflation is running hot, that the US dollar is not at the strength that it needs to be. And we'll check that out here at the Dixie real quick. Yep, the US dollar still at a year low, down 8% year to date, less than that 100 mark. So not where it needs to be. So the US dollar is weak. We have inflation running hot. And the consumer, although their confidence is extremely low, the consumer is still spending. Jerome Powell has come out and outwardly said multiple times that the consumer needs to feel some more pain or something along those lines, right? So the consumer hasn't felt enough pain for everything to go crash and burn, even though Trump is really pressuring Powell to cut the interest rates. There's still some time. At least it seems like it, right? Because the April job growth is likely slowed as hiring slows, and uncertainty of the trade wars lessen, right? So Comerica is predicting a modest gain of 115,000 jobs, which is far below March's strong showing, and the unemployment rate ticking up from 4.3 to 4.2%. Look, it stayed stagnant at 4.2%, but employers are scaling back hiring this month. Employers haven't made a big layoff announcement, but late April's increase in continued jobless claims suggests that they turned more cautious toward hiring last month while sorting through these tariffs impacts. Look, everybody's always blaming the tariffs, but the reality of the situation is that these tariffs really and severely affect the lower and the family-owned businesses, because they're not able to order these things in bulk when they are increasing these spreads or doing some other sort of tactic. They're not able to weather these types of storms, whereas some big box retailer like Walmart, they've slashed prices during this, right? When economic uncertainty comes, they cut everything down. And it's a great strategy because then they keep loyal customers, keep on coming back and keep on spending in Walmart because they believe that Walmart is doing this out of the kindness of their heart. When in reality, it's just good business because they realize that, cutting these things, it's going to bring the guys back and keep them coming in. But the reality is that the scaling back is continuing. The April report will be especially important in helping clarify the direction of the economy, noting that recent GDP numbers offer less insight than usual. So even though GDP was negative, many believe that it is lower than usual. We got the goats in the chat, All Nighter Hider saying smoke that like Cheech and Chong. And McLovin saying it's a big magic show like David Copperfield. Exactly. All of the governmental data, which I think very few people have really understood to this point in time, is essentially extremely fabricated. Right? You guys know I love showing this website, govflation.com, right? Because it's got, not only does it got Jay Powell with the money printer on the top, you can see just how much they've manipulated the data in graphs throughout the years. Look, I mean, what they used to report here in 1982, you see that gap in between those just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And in fact, the CPI is always increasing, right? And so this becomes exponential when you continue to have massive amounts of inflation. The money supply has been growing on average by 12% every single year for the past years. And then we've got CPIs. They got to update these, but CPI, real CPI at 10.67 opposed to 2.4. So we continue to see this, but something that we didn't see really change too much is the jobless claims. We saw it rose 18,000 from the previous week. But if you look at the 4-week moving average here, it really hasn't changed too much. The 4-week moving average increased again slightly. Meanwhile, continuing claims, which measure the number of people already receiving unemployment benefits, rose to 1.9616 million. In the week ending April 19th, the highest level since November 2021. So initial jobs claims, continuing claims, the 4-week moving average. This smoothed out average job filter week-to-week fluctuations, providing a more stable overall job claims. These increases in jobs claims, especially continuing claims, could signal a potential slowdown in labor market and may raise concerns about the overall health of the economy. So we've got the initial jobs claims rise more than expected at a 9-week high, right? So we're seeing them continue to rise up, but, there is still some strength in the market, right? Even though we're seeing jobs claims, a lot of uncertainty, the S&P 500 is still near that all-time high. It's down only 4% year to date. And we just seen it just pop down just slightly, but it looks like it's starting that rebound back up here. And I wouldn't be surprised if the overall market does that. We saw that crash because of the Liberation Day of what they're calling it on April 2nd, despite the wake of Liberation Day and the tariff announcements. I mean, they're just trying to humble you guys here a little bit, get a little afraid. The report to read is the FASAB 56 titled, I think, Confidential Information. Okay, what do you think? It's called Classified Activities. I'll have to check that out, All Nighter Hider. And then McLovin said, maybe humans shouldn't meddle with the currency and the economy. Just a thought. Exactly. We should just let everything play out as it be. Because the meddling of this, humans just make backdating decisions, right? I mean, if we had current up-to-date data, this decision right here would not be super difficult, right? Or if we had something that's more standardized and not based on what color tie Jerome Powell is wearing. I think that that would be, a little bit more stable, at least for humanity. But I appreciate the goats of the chat always coming along. McLovin and All Nighter Hider. You guys see it. Smoke the like Cheech and Chong. Hit the subscribe button with the bell notifications because I'm going live for you guys every single day. So please hit that subscribe button. I'm trying to get to 1K. So tell a friend to tell a friend. Hit the like button. And I'll see you guys all at the next one.